Delhi ceases to go away. It will not. It has found itself in a very interesting space wherein I think it's impossible for it not to be haunted. What it's haunted by is a different question altogether. Somebody said that, do you think that the ghosts and the jinn are affected by the AQI? Delhi is a city that's eternally mourning. There is a grave that you stumble upon every mile. There is a sense of sensitivity with which you approach these layered pasts, and I see that dwindling. And it was for me then a responsibility to talk about so many of these monuments, because many of them also had these odd beliefs superimposed on them which were far more dangerous than the supernatural. Is it easier for us to accept hauntings than it is for us to accept love? When I go to Firoz Shah Kotla and I see a woman standing in front of the pillar and tying a green chadar and depositing her Aadhaar card, that's an entirely different story. Do you think with the lack of home availability, there is a difficulty that ghosts and jinn are finding in going to these places? And I really did wonder, I take out the historian angle from it sometimes and I say to myself, was I possessed while writing this book?
Have you ever walked through a monument in Delhi and wondered what it has actually witnessed? Not just the emperors and the battles, but the quiet conversations, stolen moments, grief, love, everyday life? On this episode of the Reading List by Bahrisons Booksellers, we're exploring the hidden lives of Delhi's monuments with historian and author Eric Chopra. His debut book, Ghosted, published by Speaking Tiger, looks at how some sites came to be labeled as haunted while others simply changed meaning over time, slowly folding themselves into the city that we live in today. It's the kind of book that captures those slightly irrelevant, curious thoughts that we've all had on heritage walks, the ones that we don't always say out loud, but that make the space feel alive for you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Eric, welcome to the Reading List. I'm so glad we finally have you here. To get us started, can you introduce yourself and your work to our audience?
Thank you, Aashna. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, especially after binge watching the first season. I'm Eric Chopra. I'm a public historian, and recently I've just written a book on all the haunted monuments of Delhi and why we think history is haunted. It's called Ghosted, and that's what I do.
So, what drew you to our haunted history?
Because I'm a public historian, a large part of my work has been taking people to spaces that I love and I talk about. And from the beginning, I knew that my love for horror predates my love for history. I grew up on Goosebumps, on Vikram and Betal, and even the morbid Fear Files. But when I came to Delhi, and I'm a Delhi wala, when I started my tours, I realized that there was this natural fascination people had when they would go to a monument with me and ask me whether it was haunted. And it was everywhere: Jamali Kamali, Khooni Darwaza, Malcha Mahal. And then soon I realized that these ghosts and the jinn that haunt Delhi are not just oral histories, but are rooted in pasts that we perhaps don't confront or don't deal with. And that was the beginning of this journey.
I love it. And you also studied history at college,
Yes.
right? So, when did history stop being a subject for you and became something more personal?
I think history was always personal for me because I grew up not being an academic kid at all. I never imagined that I would be doing what I'm doing right now. Matter of fact, I was always told that I'll end up doing English honors because the belief was that if you're not an academic, you would do English honors, which is such a foolish belief because you come to college and you realize the cutoffs for English are much higher than anything else. But it was quite literally a week or 2 weeks before my board exams, my history exams, when I realized that I'm absolutely in love with this subject. I was besotted. And it was because I was told by my teacher, my history teacher, to study the entire subject from the end to the beginning. She said, go from the constitution to the Harappan civilization. It was an odd suggestion, but I took up on it. And I remember coming across Nehru's speech in the making of the Constitution, where he spoke about how to build a way forward for India or any country. You need to look back. You need to look back at its ancient roots, but you also need to look at the democracies across the world.
Yeah.
And you need to remember that history becomes a map for you. And I realized then that you have to constantly look back to pave a way forward. It was always personal that way. It was also personal because I was looking for stories that you don't find in classrooms. And so it was when my exams ended that I began my public history platform, Ithasology. And I think even before college, it was always a personal experience, and college just added to it.
So I love that your teacher said from the end to the start, but the end for her was the Constitution.
Yes.
Why not now?
You see, there is this inherent belief that history ends somewhere. And I used to always think about this in school too, because you end history at the Constitution and you begin political science with everything that happened after the 1950s. And then you come all the way to whenever the books have been updated until, in our case, I think they were only updated until 2014. So I think for her, she was, of course, restricted by the syllabus. But I think for me too, that made me realize that history actually has no full stops, because when I joined college, the first thing your professor told you as a history honor student is forget everything. Like everything you've ever been taught, you have to forget it all and remember history has no full stops. So school did put some sort of limitation on it, but I can't blame it. As an institution, it has to restrict itself and stop somewhere. But I think college gave me the toolkit to realize that this is a vast canvas, and just swimming within it made me realize that there are actually no stoppings anywhere.
Yeah, we're living through it. We're creating history right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, Itihasology. What is it and why did you start it?
Well, Ithasology has now become for me a sort of way of approaching the past. I think of it as a lens. And I started it because it was my dad who, when I returned from my board exams of history, he just saw it in me. I think he looked at me and he said, I've not seen you this fascinated, especially about a subject, like what's going on.
Nice.
And I said, I adore it. I do not know what happened to me. And it was love at first read, quite literally. So it was him who said that, because I've always been an internet person. I grew up in the age of the internet quite literally booming, right? And it was he who said, why don't you think of also taking it online? Start a blog, do something, if this is something that really interests you. And it was his suggestion to name it Ithasology. It was not even we did not go over names. He just thought of it. He said something like Ithasology would suit you. And I started an Instagram page on the day that I returned from my board exams. And then I thought of it as a platform where people could come to and seek stories that you don't find in classrooms, where the classroom perhaps ends, or the niches of the past that you don't discover. And then over the years, it's extended itself to heritage walks, to history-based musicals. We do excursions. We do a lot of art. I've gotten really obsessed with art, and a lot of Delhi, of course. So it is a public history forum for people who think that it's not possible to grow up and become a historian. But I think our work is sort of reassuring and saying, you know what? No, you can do this. It's possible for us too.
So is Ghosted then an extension of the digital blog?
In some ways, yes. As I said, when you are living right now on the internet, you are constantly looking at what people are thinking and saying. And even if it's not directly related with your work, you do realize that this is something that's very relevant for people. So apart from my heritage walks, where people would ask me about these ghosts and jinn that stay in Delhi and its monuments, it was also what I was seeing online. These travel vloggers, these bloggers, these naturally curious folks, or people who just wanted to go and make a reel, even if they did not know about the history of a specific monument, they would still go there and record themselves staying overnight and, in the hopes of catching a ghost or something. And once I got these questions from people at walks, I started searching up. I was genuinely curious. Is Delhi haunted? Why are only monuments haunted? And then on the internet, you would always find Jamali Kamali, most haunted site. Firoz Shah Kotla, most haunted site. Then you start to wonder if everything is most haunted, what's the quantifying factor for this, right? And I think it was a mix of both. It was seeing things that were happening online, doing these tours, and then realizing that as somebody who loves this city so much, the people are essential to its history creation. And I think my training as an academic also sometimes limited me to the archive, to primary sources and secondary sources. But I still remember in school, there was that one section on oral histories in the chapter on partition, wherein you thought to yourself that it is these stories that you inherit and remember and share that form such an integral part of any city's memory.
Yeah.
And it was essential for me to talk to the people too. So it was a mix of all of this, the platform, the videos I was seeing, the walks I was doing, and just the people I was meeting on a daily basis.
I love that. So much of our culture and memory and history is orally passed down.
Yes.
So why did you feel like now was the right time to write a book about all of it?
I think there are two reasons, and I would go for the personal one first. I've always wanted to be a writer. When I was I must have been 10, very young, and my parents had given me their email. And I had read a lot of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And I decided in that haze of Wimpy Kid to write off to agents sitting all the way in America, who I'd never written anything before that. And I said, I will write a book. And they could sense it's a child writing. And I remember them sending me emails back, could you send a manuscript? And,
Oh, sweet, they responded.
Yeah, they were responding. And they were like, when you grow up one day. But I just grew up with this thought, okay, I'll write something. I never knew what I was going to write on. It was always a mystery to me. And there were so many projects that you just start and then you are just staring at the screen or your notes and you do not know where you're going.
Yeah.
And then I realized when I was getting these stories from around people that I am inherently fascinated and also very much in tune with the history of Delhi overall, because when you do these walks and you're going from city to city, because Delhi is a city of cities, right? You're going from Mehrauli to Firozabad to Shahjahanabad, you are realizing that the city has layers of stories and they're registered somewhere.
Yeah.
And then it got mixed with these oral histories of the hauntings. And then I thought, why not tell the history of Delhi, which has been told and retold a gazillion times, but do it through this lens of the supernatural. So it became very personal for me when the horror aspect of it and the history aspect of it, and of course the writing aspect of it just melded. So that was a personal part. But I think it's also very important to write a book like this because we are living in times where tangible and intangible aspects of history are in danger. And I see that every day. I see that with the monuments that we talk about.
Yeah.
Accessibility, restoration, preservation, and perception, all of it dwindles, changes, morphs. And so you need somewhere a repository, you need to leave something behind and say, you may believe something about a certain space and your views on history may be influenced by a circumstance, which all of us are influenced by it. But there is a sense of sensitivity with which you approach these layered pasts. And I see that dwindling. And it was for me then a responsibility to talk about so many of these monuments because many of them are abandoned, many of them are no longer accessible, many of them had graffiti on their walls, but many of them also had these odd beliefs superimposed on them, which were far more dangerous than the supernatural. And so it was that too.
So by writing the book, you're also, I guess, creating history and formally preserving a very important part of our history that, you're right, is actively being tried to be erased right now. I want us to talk about Delhi a little bit now. So you mentioned that Delhi is made up of 7 cities. It has a long, long history, right? And in the book, you mentioned that Delhi must be haunted. Now, it sounds like a fact. It doesn't read like a dramatic statement. And I honestly, when I read it, I didn't blink an eye. I was like, yeah, of course it is. Why do you think that is?
So about the cities first, it's an ongoing debate whether there are 7 cities, whether there are 14. I think innumerable, you will always, what is the definition of a city after
Can you
all,
name the
right?
7?
Okay, so we start all the way from Mehrauli, and that's because it was the defense that the hills provided naturally. And over time, because there was population that was increasing, you needed to keep moving towards the river, you needed to expand towards areas that were more, that could be protected more easily, and the population that you had within it. So then you move towards places like Tughlakabad, you go to Firozabad, you go to Jahanpana, you go to, there was this city, there was a suburb of Ghiaspur. Also, remember the legendary first city, which was Indraprast.
Yeah.
Then you go ahead with the building of Deenpana. Then you have Shahjahanabad. And I know that I have not chronologically named any
That's
of these
fine.
cities.
We've
They're
got
all over the
7.
place. So, and then of course, there are cities that were built post what we call New Delhi, because your Purani Delhi or Old Delhi, which was Shahjahanabad, which was the freshest batch of cities, but it's called Old Delhi because the
newest Old
British,
Delhi.
yeah, because this was the newest Old Delhi, but because the British were, after the uprising of 1857, thinking of what to do with it, whether to demolish it entirely or to build a new city, they built New Delhi or Lutyens Delhi, and this part of the city, Shahjahanabad, got the name of Old Delhi or Purani Delhi. So that's on the cities. Now, when you have so many cities and an antiquity that goes back 100,000 years, with prehistoric parts going back to Anangpur, which is about 30 kilometers from the parts of Mehrauli, some parts of Mehrauli, you realize that we are living in a city that has been inhabited for so long, in so many of its parts, that there are tremors that are going to exist. It's a deeply wounded city. You've constantly seen war, you've constantly seen abandonment. When Muhammad bin Tughlaq was ruling, he literally told everybody to move to the Deccan, and the city was abandoned. And you have, however, always seen rebirth. Delhi ceases to go away. It will not. And I think in that process of dying and reincarnating and being reconquered and found again and destroyed again, it has found itself in a very interesting space wherein I think it's impossible for it not to be haunted. What it's haunted by is a different question altogether.
Delhi continues to rise from the ashes.
Yes, like Rakta Beach, like the demon that, resurrects from its own blood.
It's Delhi, a demon.
Yeah. Delhi is a beautiful, as an art historian, I think one of the things that you see in art, especially in medieval paintings, the demons are very pretty. They are very lavender colored demons. And I think if Delhi is a demon like that, it's a very adorable one.
So in the book, first of all, the book is called Ghosted, which I love. The ghosts and jinns feel like an entry point into the history of the city, but you've given equal space to the historical figures of the places that the jinns inhabit, right? The rulers, the people who go to the spaces today, the caretakers of those spaces. Was that an intentional decision you made?
Absolutely. I think when the research began, and it began very much with Jamali Kamali, which is also the cover of the book, this hidden gem box of a tomb in Mehrauli, which, by the way, when we were counting our cities of Delhi, Mehrauli in itself gets predated by Lal Kot and Kila Rai Pithoda, which is then 2 cities within. So many cities galore. And when I was told about the jinn of Jamali Kamali, jinn who are these entities made of smokeless fire, and they reside in niches. And if you see these monuments, you'll realize that a lot of them have these little arches and these small spaces where the jinn can just reside. This is also a practice in a lot of households that believe in the jinn as the guardian. And you would always notice that there are these niches in houses in Purani Delhi also, where they'll never put a candle in. because the jinn will get disturbed by the candle. It's completely reserved for the jinn.
How beautiful.
So Jamali Kamali is inhabited by jinn, not haunted. The belief is that the jinn of Jamali Kamali are notorious, and they can take offense if you are notorious too. So I was told to tie my hair and not put on itra or perfume. And then I already had perfume and itra on, so I said, I do not know how to take that off. They said that if you go inside and if you're notorious, either you'll get slapped, but if they like you, you'll be married to them. And I said, but how would you know that you got married? And they said, you wouldn't, but if you take on a lover later, he would, because he'll get slapped. So it was, it was a situation of just, maybe I'm married to a jinn, who knows?
Lover.
And I remember that people had this assumption about the jinn that they are naturally going to drive you away from the monument, and a lot of times people don't visit it for that reason. But going there, I realized it's the most beautiful monument that I've actually laid my eyes upon, and I have a huge bias for it for sure, because of the story to which I think we'll go into later. As for the people, then, why I call it ghosted is because there is one belief of the jinn inhabiting it. But what about Jamali Kamali? You say Jamali Kamali is haunted, but you barely ask why.
And who is it haunted by?
And who is it haunted by? And who were Jamali Kamali? It was actually alarming to me that there was such dearth of knowledge on Jamali, even though he was this fascinating figure, a globetrotter, a Sufi, the poet laureate for the Lodhis. When he fell out of favor, he used his poetry to make his way into the Mughal household. He was a man of so many talents. He was a completely devoted man to aesthetics. He commissioned this tomb himself. The mosque, the usage of red sandstone and white marble, unlike any other at that time, which would set the trend for tombs and mosques to come.
Wow.
This was a man you're dealing with. There's this man, Kamali, who is buried next to him, whom we know nothing about. And it was this entire story that completely hooked me. And I realized that if I'm going to talk about the haunted nature of this monument, it has to begin with understanding what period does this monument go back to, and how is it that we continue to perceive it today, through the historical lens, through the supernatural lens, and of course through the lens of the guards, the caretakers, and the people I take on walks.
Yeah. So now that we're talking about Jamali Kamali, let's go into a little bit of the history of that actual space, right? We've spoken a little bit about Jamali. We've mentioned that nobody knows who Kamali was. There are many theories of who he is. But with the writing of the chapter about Jamali Kamali, you also open up the conversation for who gets to write history, whose histories get recorded, and whose histories are remembered. Why was that such an important theme for you to pull out through this monument?
You see, Aashna, I told you that when I began my work in history, it was essential for me to find stories that we do not come across in textbooks, so the limitations that a textbook has. And Jamali Kamali, for me, the entire curio aspect of it, of who Kamali was, continues to be a question that, sometimes torments me, sometimes fascinates me, and sometimes even makes me think that perhaps that's the reason why this monument is so popular, that Kamali is an enigma and this is an enigmatic city. And as long as he's a mystery, the monument is safe. And Jamali's identity being so well known, in contrast to Kamali's being absolutely unknown, apart from the fact that we know both of them were men, because they have a pen box atop their marble graves, a kalamdan, which is supposed to connote the grave of a man. And we know that Kamali was buried in asymmetry, which is very odd for these monuments. And you would think of another monument like the Taj Mahal, where everything is symmetrical apart from Shah Jahan's grave, because he was buried next to his wife, and that was because they thought that he would want to be buried with somebody he loved for eternity. So you do get yourself buried next to people who you love and you want to spend eternity with. And I think Kamali being buried inside that grave, which was clearly somebody else's doing. Because Jamali only planned this tomb for himself.
And it's important to note that Jamali was married to a woman.
He was married
and
to a
his
woman.
son continued to take care of the monument
Yes,
after.
exactly. So his sons got in, became a part of the Mughals. One of them sided with the Afghans when Humayun was battling with the Afghans, but the other remained a Mughal loyalist. So much so that he became friends with Behram Khan, the regent when Humayun would die and Akbar at 13 would take over the Mughal Empire. And at that time, we know that Behram was buried in the vicinity of the Jamali Kamali courtyard, the graveyard. But he was later, his remains were taken to Persia where he wanted to be buried, which means, though, that the son had control on that graveyard and the compound. And I believe that it was his son who decided that this man, who my dad clearly adored enough, has to be buried next to him. And this little grave is made. It's the most gorgeous one. And when you look up at the ceiling, these bursts of blue and white and red, these tiles that are most gorgeous, singing the verses of Jamali because his poetry runs across that ceiling, you think to yourself that this man who Jamali is buried next to clearly meant enough. And there are a lot of hiccups because when historians see something like this, they immediately say they were best friends, or he was another poet, he was another Sufi, he could have been a distant cousin. There's so many ideas and theories. That's what history is about. But my question became, is it easier for us to accept hauntings than it is for us to accept love? And that's where it became very intentional for me to really piece together the story of Jamali Kamali in fragments. You really can never figure out, except I know that even in the late 1800s, this name had come up. When British surveyors would go around Mehrauli and Delhi, they would say that they're saying that there's a mystery man called Kamali buried next to Jamali. And whenever you take Jamali's name, it's impossible to take it without Kamali. It feels empty. This monument is not Jamali's grave, it's Jamali Kamali. You say it literally like a proper noun together, right?
So it's not just about hauntings and the monument and love, but it's specifically about queer love.
Here, yes. But again, I think to bring in heteronormativity or queerness to these multifaceted pasts is us also viewing it from our lens. And I think the love and the definition of love has shifted so much over centuries, right? The way in which we think of love and what is queer love and what is straight love. And ultimately, it boils down to that emotion, that intensity, and that longing and that yearning. And I firmly believe that it takes many shapes and forms once you are in love, and there is no all-defining identity to it. But I do think that for histories that have anyway been silenced and hidden and marginalized, and in the niches of the subject, it becomes very important for monuments like Jamali Kamali to exist because they make you rethink and question our beliefs, because there is this huge debate on homosexuality coming from somewhere, right? It's a colonial import, or it's an impurity that was spread, or it was just as if it travels in packets. Till you are met with, till you meet histories like these, and it makes you question a lot of your own beliefs about just love overall.
So then when you're visiting these monuments, because the 5 monuments that you cover, you did visit all of them in Delhi.
Yes.
And then you go to the archives and you're learning about them at the archives, which is where your formal history education comes in, right? How did the visits and the opportunity to engage with actual people who are using the spaces today, how did that impact how you write about these places?
That's a brilliant question, and absolutely. So the 5 monuments that I look at and that I was visiting throughout, we began with Jamali Kamali. Then I went to the fortress of Firoz Shah Firoz Shah Kotla. Then I came to the morbidly named Khooni Darwaza, which is right in front of Firoz Shah Kotla. Then we go to Mutiny Memorial, which was built in the uprising, after the uprising of 1857 by the British, the most Gothic-looking tower of Delhi, which is now being opened for marriage shoots, I think, which is just odd. And
No.
yeah, and then finally the ever gripping story of a family that lived in an abandoned hunting lodge in the middle of a forest called Malcha Mahal. So these were the 5 monuments. And lucky me, there is enough content. And this is not the kind of content that we're used to speaking about. Enough content in primary and secondary sources on these monuments.
Mm-hmm.
They were all built by people who are well known,
Mm-hmm.
and their histories are also multi layered.
Yeah.
So, in the historical archive, you would come across the story of its building, of its builder, of its demolition at times, of the population that lived around it, of the poetry written on it, of the material used in the making of it, and of the labor required in creating this. And of course, constantly you would come across why it was built. The historical archive tries and, it tries to answer this. But what do the people say? Now, Firoz Shah Kotla, for example, which was this fortress built by Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who succeeded Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and he was anyway dealing with this crisis of, his predecessor having shifted the capital,
Yeah.
the economy was dwindling, there were a lot of problems, and imminent was Timur's invasion. But before this, Firoz Shah Tughlaq decides he also wants a city of his own, because everybody wants a city by
Of
their
course.
name. So he builds this pretty fortress, and on his tours, when he's going around, he notices these pretty pillars that he knows nothing about, except there is something written on them. And he gets his chroniclers and people around and he says, "What's written on this? Isme kya likha hai?" And they said, "We do not know." But if you also say, "We do not know" at that time,
Yeah.
you get killed, right? So you also have to make up answers.
Yeah.
And then the chroniclers would say, this pillar says that only you, Sultan, can pluck it out of this place and bring it back to your fortress.
Which he did
Which
successfully.
he did successfully. It is only in the 19th century, 19th, 20th centuries when we come to the understanding that these are ancient Ashokan pillars that go back 2000 years. So clearly the Sultan had an eye. He could understand how visually important these pillars were, and they were ancient.
Yeah.
And it is a long drawn practice of rulers going back to ancient times to claim legitimacy. It's a very old practice.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so that was happening over here. And he brings this pillar. Now, in the archive, I can tell this story. But when I go to Firoz Shah Kotla and I see a woman standing in front of the pillar, right next to the railings that guard it, and looking up to it and tying a green chadar and depositing her Aadhaar card and a letter alongside it and calling this pillar the Lathwale Baba, or the saint of the pillar, the chief of the jinn saints who are supposed to inhabit the niches of Firoz Shah Kotla, Chote Mian, Bade Mian, Nanne Mian. That's an entirely different story. It's a parallel world that coexists with the archive, but also in the minds and the memories of the people. And I think that coming together for me at these monuments was phenomenal, and a lot of times also very confusing, because as a historian, you try and restrain and you think you have a bird's eye view and that you are separate from the people that you're observing. But imagine this: I'm standing in a monument and there are hundreds of people talking to unseeable entities, and I'm the only one who doesn't see them. Who's the odd one out? So it was a very perplexing research process.
I get chills as you're saying this. I haven't been to Firoz Shah Kotla myself, but in the book you talk about how the nature of that space, how the pillar, at one point you could go to it, you could
Yes.
go up to it, you could touch it.
Yes.
And then eventually the government gets involved, the ASI gets involved, you start getting pillars around it, you start getting barriers around it.
Yes.
And then when do you think people started putting their Aadhaar cards there?
Okay, so the original work that was done on this, and the only one that was looking at this place from a sociological perspective, was Anand Vivek Taneja's book Genealogy. And when I read that, and when I spoke with him about my book and my experiences at Firoz Shah Kotla, he said to me that it was, in his time, the thing to do, to go up to the pillar, to hug it, and to sit next to it. And it was he who actually said that this was one of those monuments in Delhi that was very anti-patriarchal, because most of the population that was coming were women, Hindu, Muslim, both. And they were coming with problems like it ranged from domestic violence to unemployment to just issues that they could be facing with their households, with their neighbors. These were very domestic issues too.
Yeah.
But it was his work that really traced this back to the emergency. And it was this belief that once you gave up on powers that be, and you gave up on the authorities to go to, you went back then to the Persianate, to the, and then again, of course, a very Delhi tradition of shikwa, of presenting your gile shikwe, your grievances, to the ruler. Just in this case, it became the jinn. And I think the process of Aadhaar cards, of letters, is very much rooted in the psyche that we have, influenced by our circumstances. When you go to a bank for something as small as changing your PIN and you're told to reproduce your 8th grade mark sheet, I mean, you're just always having to produce something from somewhere which you have forgotten over time. I think it's that fear. Why do we fear these institutions so much? Because they'll ask you to bring something that you have no memory of, and you're like, how do I bring this? I think Firoz Shah Kotla works in the same way, because the process is that you go, you deposit your problems and the letter, but you also do it like a Sufi shrine. You take a thread with you and you tie it. And as Sohail Hashmi said, that he had not seen this in any other place except a Sufi dargah, because the Sufi is beholden to you now. Until the time your problem is not resolved, you will not come in and tie it. You will see this in the dargahs of Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia and also in Ajmer Sharif. So many people who want children, they go and they tie it and they untie it once their child has come. So Firoz Shah Kotla has those same practice. And I think the letters and the identity cards and the Aadhaar cards simply exist so that your wish does not get lost in the thousands that the jinn are getting, because it's a bureaucratic office of jinn, right?
Of course.
Latwale Baba says, you go to Nanne Miya, now you go to Bade Miya, they are going to handle your case. So it's like that.
Wow. So then, in a time and space where your tangible and your real and observable powers that be fail you, there is something that we need to believe in and something that we need to fall back on to be able to go through life, look for help, look for guidance.
Yes.
And that this is where so many Dilliwalas turn to.
Yes.
It's not always tangible. It may just be the otherworldly.
Yeah.
And it's not always scary.
It's not scary. And like the jinn of Jamali Kamali, the jinn of Firoz Shah Kotla are supposed to bless you, which is what makes jinn different from ghosts, because jinn are believed to choose their ways of being. They will also get judged on the day of judgment according to their deeds. And so the jinn of Firoz Shah Kotla are saintly figures, father figures. They're all called Baba. And of course by women mostly, right? Unlike the jinn of Jamali Kamali who slap you or who are jealous of your lover. So it is that intriguing world. But also, Aashna, you said you go to history. But Firoz Shah Kotla was also a place of refuge, not only in the last, 30, 40 years, but also at the time of partition. Post-partition camps were set up in monuments like Humayun's tomb and Firoz Shah Kotla. And before that, during the uprising of 1857, when populations were driven out, killed, and removed from Shahjahanabad, the walled city, the first monument that you would come to when you took an exit from the Delhi gate was the Khooni Darwaza, but next to it was Firoz Shah Kotla. So people would go inside and seek refuge. It was also the place for revolutionaries to go and make plans. They used to go and use it as a hideout spot. So Firoz Shah Kotla has always been this place of refuge. And somehow, none of the people seeking refuge are ever aware of these stories. And yet the monument just continues to be.
Which is why then it becomes so important for us to take oral accounts into account when you are looking at histories, because now that you're talking about these spaces, they are so animated. They have a life of their own. They have a history of their own. They've seen so much. But then do you think there is a flattening of these spaces when we talk about them in history, in a historical text, for example? Because when you're talking about them, they're real. They have a life of their own. they have personalities of their own, right?
Yeah.
Have we just turned them into tourist traps and, like, I don't know, spaces to make content?
I think it depends on, again, who, because the historian really plays the biggest role in forming your perception of the past. If you are given the tools of a historian, that is too much power. And we are seeing it play out in real time now. History is at the same time a subject that nobody will tell you to pursue because they'll say there is no future with the past, and yet it's the hottest subject out there. I mean, you see this on all your debates that historians are getting maligned, berated, sometimes even in the rare occasion celebrated, but only if they say what you want to hear. But the historian, when they choose to go to the archive, it's about selecting what you think finally makes the cut, right? Because there's so much, but the movie has to be of a certain duration. The historical archive is as fascinating, though, Aashna. I think what flattens this is our process of engaging with it. And it begins quite literally from school. It begins with this belief that this is a subject about dates, names, and places. And it begins with this idea that it's about remembering, but not teaching you what to do with that remembering. So you remember something, but now what? I have inherited all of this without consent, and I remember this death and this battle. What do I do with it now? Should that not be the aspect that we should focus on? Even for me, the archives and the primary sources were deeply fascinating. I mean, that is something that the second last and the third chapter really go into with Khooni Darwaza. The primary sources are so fascinating. But do we hear them in our textbooks? No. And that's what flattens the experience. So I think it's about what you choose to remember and how then you choose to carry that memory ahead.
So while we're talking about reclaiming history and flattening of histories, I want us to talk a little bit about the Khooni Darwaza, because its original name is not Khooni Darwaza. But I want to go a little bit into that history because it's really fascinating how that monument came to be. First of all, who made it? Where did it come from? And then how it gained its haunted history. Can we talk about that a little?
So the Khooni Darwaza was most likely built by this man called Sher Shah Suri, who had taken over Delhi for the period that he had Humayun in exile. The Afghans had made a comeback. And it is in that period in the 16th century when we think this Darwaza was built. And yes, its original name, or the name that we think is most appropriate for it, is Lal Darwaza because it's red.
Descriptive.
Yes, so it's very obvious. That's why it's lal and red. But for a long time, apart from Khooni Darwaza, there was also the belief that this is the Kabuli Darwaza, which is wrong because the Kabuli Darwaza was one of the gates of Shahjahanabad in the other side.
Okay.
Khooni Darwaza, however, is the most morbid aspect because it means bloodied doorway, and you do not realize why because it's a very unassuming gate. And I'll tell you honestly, when I began my research, I was not at all excited about the story because I'm a visual person. And looking at this gate, I said, what will I talk about? It's actually just red and in the middle of this road in front of Firoz Shah Kotla. But then the stories.
But what's on the side of the door now, on either side?
So the door is in the middle of Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg. On one side is Firoz Shah Kotla, and on the other side is the Maulana Azad Medical College. And that space used to earlier be the jail. So the college and that entire area is built in the vicinity of a former jail.
Okay.
And Khooni Darwaza is in the middle of all of this. And there were these news documentaries that were made about 10 years ago that I watched to understand why Khooni Darwaza is Khooni Darwaza, because it was only them who was talking about this, not the historical archive. You do not come across that term ever. And they took you to these monuments, and in very dramatic fashion of a soap opera with a lot of music and repetition, they said, "Ye wahi darwaza hai that hung the bodies of the sons of Abdurrahim Khani Khana, Abdurrahim, Rahim ke dohe.
Yeah.
This is the same darwaza that Dara Shuko's head was hung on after Aurangzeb had it removed from his body. And this is the same Darwaza where the sons and grandson of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, were shot. When I went through the archive, I came across so many versions of what happened with Dara Shuko, of what happened with the sons of Abdurrahim Khani Khana. And in none of these versions did I ever come across this gate. And I believe that this linking of the story of these other two figures, Abdurrahim's sons, who are left nameless, by the way, and of Dara Shuko, has more to do with how we want to remember and think about these figures than an actual story. And because we know for a fact the sons and grandson of Bahadur Shah Zafar were shot in the vicinity, I still think that they were not shot directly in front, but nearby. But because that incident happened, it was that which gave it the name Khooni Darwaza. And then these stories that were created after were to add to a legacy of a gate that has been haunted and wounded throughout time.
And when you say haunted, you don't mean haunted by ghosts.
Yes.
Just a haunting of a memory of violence
Yes.
and of death.
Yes, exactly. Because see, the gate is positioned in front of, at that time, the Delhi gate, which was the gate that you were exiting from when you came out of Shahjahanabad or going inside. The British took Bahadur Shah Zafar's 80-year-old being with his wife on a cart from Humayun's tomb to his own palace, where they reduced him to nothing through this gate. The dead bodies of his sons and grandson were brought in through this gate on a cart and left to rot and for people to see and talk about. So these gates that were connecting the city were seeing a lot of violence. And inevitably then, all of this gets lodged somewhere. And so you're haunted by these tremors more than anything else. And I think each time the Khooni Darwaza's haunting is talked about, it goes back to that, to the uprising of 1857, to what happened to Delhi afterwards, and that debate that the British had whether Delhi should be allowed to survive. It all goes back to that. So yes, I feel also sorry for my perception of the gate in the beginning, because we think that we see a tomb and it's more important. But then there were these unassuming little spaces that registered a lot through just the people that passed under it and the stories that they saw and remembered,
And then do people in different geographies then engage, remember, and interact with these histories and hauntings and the gifts from the past in a different way? Because when we've previously had conversations on this, you've mentioned that the reception of ghosted, but also the thought that your cities and spaces are haunted is very different in different cities. So Bombay would look at it very differently, or Hyderabad would look at it differently. Delhi just assumes it's haunted and we go with it because it's a fact of life.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've noticed?
Absolutely. I was actually very afraid when I was writing this book, because I thought, would this be received anywhere apart from Delhi? And am I being so selfish while writing this? It's an ode to Delhi. There's so many histories of it. But then I thought about the larger theme, ghosts. And I realized that if not Delhi, perhaps the supernatural will draw people in. But it really surprised me. Once the book came out, Delhi is like Mesopotamia with its belief of ghosts. We all just believe ghosts are just around us all the time. So you go along with that belief. And in Delhi, the questions that I get asked are actually not questions, but would always be an experience. So during Q&A, it would start with, I have something to ask, and it would always end with, so I saw this ghost at Agra Singh Ki Baoli, and what do you think about it? In Bombay and Hyderabad, I was there with your sister, and you were talking about love. And during this panel, what became very interesting for me was to talk about the monuments like Jamali Kamali and Malcha Mahal, the last chapter, and then in the Q&A realize that the questions that people had over there were very much rooted in an academic geographical thought of what's happening to monuments around them, or on fictions, because this was also a panel on fiction, and somewhere along the line this book does deal with fictions, right?
Yeah.
In Hyderabad, I got asked questions about in times when fiction is being used to put or threaten history, how do you as historians deal with fiction? In Bombay, because it's going under this massive construction and renovation, I think they're finding a new Bombay from beneath. They ask me questions about what happens to ghosts when you excavate and when you build new things or when you build over old sites. So everywhere, the idea of the ghost takes shape according to what people in their geographies are seeing happening around them. So Delhi is simply my geography, but the ghost that exists here is traveling across the world, and people are making the ghost and the jinn and the supernatural lens a way of understanding their own cities, which is very exciting. And I learn something new each time I go to a different city.
What does happen to ghosts when you are unearthing new places and making new constructions?
I kid you not. In Jaipur, when I was speaking at the Jaipur Literature Festival, we had a genuine question from somebody. Later, when we were doing book signing, somebody said that, do you think that the ghosts and the jinn are affected by the AQI of Delhi? And whether that is a problem. And then they asked me that, do you think with the lack of home availability, there is a difficulty that ghosts and jinn are finding in going to these places? To think about the logistics of the other world was something that's beyond my purview because I'm not a paranormalist. But when you do have these questions, you do have to think about them, right? And I realized that the only question that made most sense to me was the one that you've just asked. What happens to the ghost once a site changes its shape? So something happens with the story, not the ghost. And the example could be of Mehrauli Archaeological Park, where Jamali Kamali is. There are two monuments in Mehrauli Archaeological Park that are the most popular. Jamali Kamali on one end and Kuli Khan's tomb on the other. Jamali Kamali is till date unticketed. It is always kept locked. There is a guard. The guard keeps changing, and if they take a liking to you, they would perhaps let you in and see it. But on most occasions, no. You have to go through this long process of getting permission in, and that takes, as you know, a billion years. The other monument over there, Kuli Khan's tomb, was for me the most haunted monument until 2023. I went there when COVID restrictions were lifted.
Okay.
It looked like such a sad space. This was a monument of a man who we do not know anything about. And I think quite erroneously, we think of him to be the brother of Adam Khan, who was Akbar's foster brother. This grave had graffiti all over it. Its walls were crumbling. There was a lone guard that used to sit there and used to talk about how he has seen people over here who are possessed. And this monument was purchased by a British guy called Thomas Metcalfe during the 1800s, who converted it into a honeymoon retreat. Imagine converting a grave into a honeymoon retreat. His own daughter spent her honeymoon there. And I wondered, for a monument like this, it has to be haunted by this wounding. But then it was restored. It was ticketed. A cafe came up next to it. Wedding photo shoots happen over there now. There's a different entry fee for, of course, international visitors and domestic visitors. There is this artificial lake. The view of the Qutub Minar is unparalleled. And I have to say, it's stunning work. It looks gorgeous. But those stories have immediately vanished. There are no possessions anymore. That guard doesn't stay over there. And it makes you think that a lot of times these hauntings occur because you're quite literally abandoning the past and just letting it be. And the sincerity with which you can preserve, restore something, that affects the way in which it's remembered and the stories that continue or linger. So yes, spaces, when they change, stories stop existing there. Why do you think Humayun's tomb is not haunted or the Qutub Minar is not haunted? Even though there are Humayun's tomb is a graveyard. Quite literally, so many of them are buried there. But it's also the most populated and a very well visited ticketed monument. So those stories don't exist there.
Lodi Garden as well.
Lodi Garden as
We
well.
go there for picnics. We go there for book readings. We go there to hang.
Yeah, exactly.
Full of graveyards.
Exactly. All of these were, as you know, it goes back to you saying that you wouldn't think about how you want to be buried, but that was a large concern for all of them. It was, how do you rule while you're living, and then how do you make sure you maintain your legacy when you're dead? So Delhi is a city that's eternally mourning. There is a grave that you stumble upon every mile. It's impossible to not think about death in this city, which is covered by it. And yet you see that only some of those places end up being haunted.
When we talk about graffiti in these monuments and the changing nature of how we engage with these spaces, it reminds me of this really hilarious moment in the book where you and your friend visit Malcha Mahal, which in itself was never haunted until it became haunted all of a sudden in the 21st century. But it's really funny because there's markings on the wall of like lines, and you're like, I wonder who's counting down the days here. And then there's right after that, you're like, oh, there's probably people just playing a game.
Yeah.
Right. But that tells us something about our changing relationships with the space, because Malcha Mahal in itself, first it was a hunting lodge, obviously for our favorite emperor. And then it became the space that was occupied by the family of the Awadh royalty. And now, all of a sudden, once the family no longer lives there, the space is haunted. And then the state comes in and says, we must protect this place, right? But that one hunting lodge has seen so much over time and has so many myths around it in today's day and age. Can we unpack that a little?
Yes, and it was very hilarious because you just realize how much a story can play with your mind, especially the time that you interact with that story too and when you choose to go there. So my friend and I, we visited during a foggy-ish December, and remember entering that monument at the time when you could just enter the monument. There were no restrictions. There was a barricade that had just been removed by people who were going inside. And it was unguarded apart from the various monkeys and bats that live there. And yes, it's built by Firoz Shah Kotla, which is just the fact that he is everywhere where there's any sign of the other world is just, what was he up to, right? Now, this monument becomes, as you said, a home for a very long period. And it becomes the home of this woman called Begum Vilayat Mahal, her children, whom she refers to as Prince Ali and Princess Sakina, her dogs, her help, and of course her Persian carpets and jewelry and so on and so forth. She stationed herself at the New Delhi railway station for years, demanding that she be given a house that could fit her status and the status of her family. And she said that I belong to the house of Awadh, to Begum Hazrat Mahal and Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. And for people who even have a cursory understanding of Indian history know that it was this Lucknowi Nawab and his exile and the taking over of Awadh by the East India Company that also contributed in the uprising of 1857. So this woman says that my family has always been wronged, and she writes to Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, saying that your father, Nehru, when he was the Prime Minister, gave me a house in Kashmir. That house got burned down. So now I need a house in Delhi. So she's offered some houses, but she's also demanding properties in Lucknow that were erstwhile and that belonged to the erstwhile royal house. She could not get them because they were converted into research centers. And in a country where there are so many people claiming ancestry from the princes, how do you testify that, all right, this is somebody that we can give a home to? So she was offered houses after houses. Ultimately, she gets offered this abandoned hunting lodge in the middle of the central rich forest in Delhi. But because it's near Chanakyapuri and the diplomatic enclave, I think somewhere her wish to be in a very elite area of Delhi was met.
But also Malcha Mahal was supposed to be, or was an alternative for Rashtrapati Bhavan when the British were there,
yes. Right? So Malcha village, when New Delhi was going to be built, Malcha village was supposed to be taken over, and the land was going to be used when Lutyens' Delhi was being built. Villagers from Malcha were also sent away, and wherever they go, they continue to use the word Malcha in the places that they're established in. I think there is also an establishment near Sonipat. So you have this history that goes back to the 1900s when a new Delhi was being built and everything was being laid out systematically. And then in the 1980s, this woman and her family insert themselves into the story.
Yeah.
She starts living there. And as legend goes, they have to put up a sign outside, intruders will be shot dead. She also used to have a person come out with a silver tray if you wanted to meet her. And I know Sam Miller, who wrote his book on Delhi years ago, he said that you had to leave, a request on this letter.
Your calling card.
Exactly, and you would be called, like the queen calls you years later. This is your appointment. And then the legend goes that she crushed diamonds and swallowed them and died. And R.V. Smith, who used to go around Delhi collecting these stories, said that the guards would tell you Hira Chart Liya, the cause of death. Few years later, her daughter also passes away due to heartbreak. And then finally, we see the death of Prince Ali in 2017. And then there's a report that we won't go into, but the New York Times broke a report and revealed that this was a story that was a partition story, ultimately. After this, however, there was a brief period when there was a lot of theft that happened in the monument. People walked in, stole their carpet, stole the jewelry, stole a lot of things, brought it back home. And then it was locked off when everything was stolen. When I went, nothing was happening there. It was empty. There were these tally marks and there were these broken. There was a fridge that I believe was their closet because there was no electricity and there was no water and there was no door. The fridge was also stolen a few years later. I did not see it again. Till finally, the Delhi Tourism Department in 2023, 2024 decided to announce that they will do haunted heritage walks at the monument. And I went for 2 of them and we were given caps so that the monkeys don't, come and pull our hair. And we were told the bats will be there. And we went in with such nonchalance. I mean, there was nobody who was scared. We were all just ready that we were going for a haunted heritage walk. We were given bands that said haunted heritage walk.
Were they glow in the dark?
They didn't glow in the dark, unfortunately. And we went inside and I narrate that experience in the book, so read the book. But after that, it's just been locked off. Now you can't go inside because there is some restoration work that is supposed to take place in the vicinity. And they said in the news reports that came out in 2024 that for that purpose, we have to secure the monument. But its legacy is very complicated now because yes, the horrors exist post the family's death. But there are deeper horrors here that, of course, again go back to the partition, but then also with how we as people are dealing with it. And I really wondered on that walk that I went into, I went with that skeptical mindset of this is ghost tourism and is this something that we should do? Then you wondered, isn't this again an entry point? Isn't this why this was a sold out walk? It was sold out. Summer afternoon. Where do you see that happening in monuments? You saw that with Malcha Mahal. And I think that's what I still deal with. I sit with that story sometimes and I think to myself, what would have happened to Malcha Mahal if the family never came? And once the family came, what do we do with this heartbreaking story that they've left behind for us? It's something that deeply troubles me, quite honestly.
That is a beautiful and a heartbreaking way to look at the history of that space. But also, I guess in a city where every part of the city is built on one history after another, do you see the way that different people, different groups of people, different ages are engaging with our history? Is it different?
Absolutely. And you're right to point that out, that we are living in a city that's constantly rewriting over itself, much like the Iron Pillar at the Qutub complex. And there are so many layers that you stumble upon in Delhi or in any city that I think is both rich with history but also heavy with history. There are cities that exist in that liminal space of being wounded but also being adorned by the past. And Delhi is one such city. And I realized that every generation, including mine, including the one before me, and including the one that's to come, deals with the past in a way which is very different. But at the core, is still this hope of making a connection with it. And I think in our own ways, we are always trying to do that. I also think with the supernatural elements that I bring out in the book through talking to different generations, I realize that when you talk to an older generation, the belief with the ghosts is not something to be taken lightly. They tell you very seriously that if you sleep under a peepal tree, you will be possessed, you will be slapped, you will be, the slapping is a recurrent theme, and you will have to undergo a purification process to come back even. For a newer generation, perhaps this would be enticing to just test out, go to a monument that is supposed to be haunted and try and see what comes back with you. We had even a news report many years ago, somebody going to Jamali Kamali, and then they left the city. They did not come back. This was a journalist. So you do have that aspect of curiosity, of superstition, and of this a strong belief that there is much more than meets the eye at this place because it's layered. But I think at the core is the hope that somewhere you'll meet the past. We also live in a time when stories spread like wildfire. Anything that you say becomes the next second something that everybody else knows about. That's what the digital age does to you. And in an age which is filled with stories, I think some of these that have been lingering over time and in many ways morphing and shape shifting according to each generation that deals with it is much like what happened at Firoz Shah Kotla. It's everybody seeking refuge, nobody knowing about each other, but everybody doing the same thing. And I think that's the same thing going intergenerationally too.
That's a beautiful way to summarize it. And now that we're talking about the digital age, I do want to talk about the title of the book because ghosted obviously means something very different to younger generations. Why did you go with ghosted?
Because I also come from that generation where the term really resonated with me. And I remember somebody, a friend of mine actually, when I'd come out with the book and said, this is the title, saying, oh, so you speak from experience. And I said, it's not a memoir yet. But also because the way in which we use the term ghosted, it means that somebody in the term of a relationship, it's somebody becoming a ghost, somebody vanishing on you, somebody trying to erase themselves out of your life. And the reason I use the word ghosted over here is because a lot of times these stories for me were also ghosting the larger historical backdrop, which was their origin. So it was not to say that these monuments are ghosted by these stories and therefore the stories don't have much relevance, but it was to say that in the process of them getting ghosted, what is the backdrop that vanished and got itself erased in that process? And that's why I thought it was appropriate. And also we live in an age where people, and I've always judged books by their covers and their names. I mean, people who are also visually enchanted do that. And I knew that when you see this in a bookstore, if not for the ghosts or the history, you would just say, oh my God, I've been through that. So let me just pick it up. So it was a threefold reason to go for this.
And the color palette?
Well, the color palette was decided after various colors. So the first thought was to go with black and red. And then everything that was coming out of that was looking like gore horror, and I did not want to do that. And then we decided to look at the tomb of Jamali Kamali. And I remember when we were speaking with the publisher, Speaking Tiger, and the designer, I had said that whenever somebody asks me what my favorite monument is, I first pretend and say, I'm a historian. But I have to say, it is Jamali Kamali. I love this grave. And if you look at the palettes of the grave with the blues, with the whites, that was something that was, to me, a very enchanting color. But very interestingly, the designer had, years ago, lived near Mehrauli. She grew up with memories of this place. We never discussed the color palette. But after I said that I do not want it to be black and red, she sent this. And I saw it, and it was just, it is to me the most enchanting color there is, this mixture of the pink and the purple. And I think certain things just immediately speak to you without reason. And the cover has to be one of those things. So I think the enchantment of it, vis-a-vis the gore and the horrifying and the literal aspect of a red and black, it was that choice, and we went with this.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. Yeah.
Now that the book is out, has your relationship with Delhi and Delhi's monuments and history changed?
I think it is not necessarily just because of the book. Of course, with the book coming out, what has changed is I am now rich with many more stories because I get emails and I get, as I said, even at the end of Q&As,
Yeah.
I am now listening to people who are telling me things that they believe in. And this goes beyond the ghostly. They talk to me about what they feel about a monument, where they spent their younger days, where they met their lover for the first time. And I'm rich with those stories, and I feel really grateful for people that they trust me with these stories. But my relationship does change with some of the monuments because of how their relationship changes with authorities. So many of these monuments, as I said, keep on morphing and keep on shape-shifting. Malcha Mahal, for example, I do not know when can we go back in again. Jamali Kamali, I have a perennial question of when will it get easier for those locks to be opened. I think I wrote this book with some sort of, I don't know, did I have a premonition? Did I think that some of these monuments would get locked up? And this is something I really thought about. All of these monuments changed after, in the process of writing the book. Firoz Shah Kotla, I saw it very differently 3 years ago. And now, if you deposit a letter, immediately it's picked up and thrown in the trash. So it's changing in front of my eyes. And I really did wonder, I take out the historian angle from it sometimes and I say to myself, was I possessed while writing this book? Because how come these monuments within the book are changing so rapidly? And in turn, changing my relationship with them, but also the city's relationship with them. And would a generation get to see the Jain saints of Firoz Shah Kotla, the glimmering ceiling of Jamali Kamali, or the dark, morbid, but heartbreaking interiors of Malcha Mahal? That is something I think is for us to really wonder.
Yeah, at some point in their lives, those would also be relegated to the stories that are passed down to them from their families.
Yes.
And they'll become a part of their histories.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe their engagement with those monuments would be different.
Or there would be 5 new haunted monuments of Delhi that would come in the process, because history is constantly in the making.
Yes, a ghosting continues.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, are you ready for rapid fire?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's go. One historical event you time travel to witness but not interfere in.
The creation of Jamali's tomb.
Okay. If historians had theme music when they entered the room, what would yours be?
Professor Snape's. I think that is, if he has a theme music, that would be it. Because I have just been told, I've been invited to a party that's celebrating 25 years of Harry Potter, and they said, we're inviting you because you look like Snape. So I think that.
If you were hosting a dinner party for historical figures, who would be on the guest list?
How many people can I invite?
Firoz Shah and everybody else.
Okay, so Firoz Shah for sure, Ibn Battuta, Noor Jahan, because I'll give back her necklace to her from Margot Robbie.
Of course.
And of course, Jamali and Kamali to finally figure out who are you,
If you were a ghost, where would you choose to linger? In library, a battlefield, parliament, or a family home?
Why the parliament?
Why not? Historical decisions are made there.
I would
Supposed to be.
Yes, exactly. I would say a family home still. Yeah.
Okay. What's more dramatic? Royal succession crises or modern family WhatsApp groups?
Modern family WhatsApp groups. So modern groups of apartments where you have all the residents in one group.
RWA groups.
Yes. I know that was not an option.
That's
but
fine.
It's that.
You win. It's okay.
Yeah.
Which historical figure would absolutely be a menace on Twitter?
Jahangir.
Why?
Because his curiosity would lead him to the voids of Twitter that we are so familiar with, and the reason that I'm not on Twitter. And I think he would be tweeting whatever comes to. He would be like Salman Khan was on Twitter years ago. I don't know if you remember his tweets. I think Jahangir's would be the same. Read his diary and you would just know he would be a menace.
Do you think Jahangir would be on the "Hey Grok, explain this to me"?
Yes, absolutely, because he would see a spider fighting with a snake and he would be like, oh my God, that's so fun. Let me write that down. And with Twitter, he would have the ability to ask all these questions. Jahangir.
Finally, if you had to inhabit one of the historical monuments that you've written about, which one would it be?
I would say Malcha Mahal, even though the belief would be that I would say Jamali Kamali, but it already is populated. Malcha Mahal simply because, unlike the other monuments, it is not supposed to be a fortress, a bloodied gateway. It was a hunting lodge, a shikargah, and just to see, to be able to be a spectator through its myriad histories as a ghost and as a silent ghost would be very, very interesting for me. So I would say Malcha Mahal.
But you wouldn't have running water.
I wouldn't have running water, but then this goes back to the logistics of the other world, right? I think I'll just figure it out.
Who would you pay rent to?
Possibly in that case, Prince Ali Raza, because he was the one who continued living there to 2017. So I'll just take it out from one of the money notes he got and just give it back to him.
This conversation was such a beautiful deep dive into the history of the city that we both live in and love. So I'm really glad we got to do it with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Aashna.
And for our listeners and viewers, I really hope you guys go out and get a copy of Ghosted for yourself. It's a really fun book and something that you can take along with you next time you go on a heritage walk. Thank you for being here. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.